Hey everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. It's that time again for a reading wrap-up for the month of October, which is now done and dusted. Forgive my slightly nasal voice. Got some kind of allergies going on today. I'm not quite sure why or what's causing it. I don't usually have allergies particularly, but for some reason something's bothered me today, and it's kind of making my voice a little froggy and nasally, probably. I don't know if you can tell the difference or not. Probably don't care. So let's move on. Okay, this was a pretty good month. It's a very busy time usually for me at work. The semester is at both schools that I'm teaching at is fully in swing there, and I can always probably read more and fit more reading in than I do. Probably watch fewer BookTube videos and read more books, but it was a pretty decent reading month. So let me just go through a few things first before I get to the books I read. Talking about the channel and what I covered on the channel. In case you missed it, I did 2 lives, my first ever lives for this channel, live streams, and I will link them below. David at Garage Geek kindly helped me work through some of the technical kinks and accompanied me during both of those streams. The first one was just me and him talking about some of our favorite physical media products. And then we were joined by Paul from Geeks Love Dogs, who kindly joined us, and we had a nice chat about favorite horror films and books and other things like that. Both of those live recordings are available on my channel here under the Lives tab if you want to catch them and you haven't yet. They were a lot of fun, and we had some nice guests, people showing up in the comments to say hi and chip in. That was a lot of fun, and I'll look forward to doing more lives in the future. It was a hoot. And I also did Paul's, speaking of Paul from Geeks Love Dogs, Paul had his first ever tag, the Dog Tags book tag, where he had some fun prompts, and David at Garage Geek went out and did one, and Connor at Movie Snapper did his version. Maybe a few others did. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I know I did one, and it was fun, if a little bit more difficult than I first expected. So that was fun, and thanks to Paul for tagging me for that. And I also did my top 10 book covers. Not a tag really, but Ben at Grammaticus Books did his version of that video, which was really fun, and then Richard at Vintage SF did as well, and they both kind of put out the, hey, join in if you want to call. And so I and a bunch of other people have joined in, and some are still posting as of right now, today. So I know Gareth at Book Songs and Other Magic has just posted his top 40. Now we're going to let him get away with it because he's a musician. And Michael Cavan earlier pushed the boat out with top 20. I know it's very hard to come up with the top 10, so I don't blame those guys for finding some creative means to get around it. I think we all kind of showed a few runners up and additional ones, and hedged our bets a little bit that way. I know David at Garage Geek did a couple very good ones, one paperback, one hardback. I will put links to the playlist of them and some of the others who haven't been added to the playlist yet down in the description of this video, and some other things that I got up to. It was my birthday this last month, one of the many reasons why I like October. The weather starts to get nicer, especially here after a very hot and humid summer in Osaka, in Japan in general. It's very nice to have some cooler weather to help get me in the Halloween mood, and also it's my birthday, and so my wife kindly got me some cool prezzies, including a original 1976 $6 Million Man comic issue number 2 out of 9, and I did a flip through of that. That was fun. I also, with my wife, found or helped me find another Yahoo Auctions surprise, a creepy number 76, also from 1976. and I went through that kind of at the end of the month. So those videos will also be linked below, and I hope you check them out if you haven't already. Okay, let's talk about the books that I read this month. So let's start with the first book I read this month, which was kindly sent to me by Nick at the Book Graveyard. He sent me a whole bunch of books in the previous month, and I believe I got them in September. And I was in the hospital, not anything serious, but I was getting some kind of tests done to check up on myself after a brief little fall I took, which was kind of weird. And so I had myself checked out. Everything's fine, nothing to worry about. But it was a long 7-hour day in the hospital. So luckily I had this book to keep me occupied in my bag while I was at the hospital. Lawrence Block, The Sins of the Fathers. This is the first Matthew Scudder book. Lawrence Block had several series. He's got the Bernie Rodenbar series about a thief, and I know he's got some other series that I haven't read much of, and I've read a couple of the later Matthew Scudder novels. I hadn't read this first one. It's really good. It was published in 1976. Lawrence Block is a Boston writer, but I believe this one is set in New York. Matthew Scudder is a former cop, a former homicide detective who, or maybe he was a patrol cop. I can't remember exactly. I'd read this way back early in the month, but he left the force because in the middle of a shootout with some criminals, he was trying to stop an attempted robbery or something. He accidentally shot and killed a young girl. And of course, he just couldn't face himself after that. And he's become an alcoholic. He's a very highly functioning alcoholic, at least in this book. I think later in the series, it gets a little more hardcore as he works his way to being clean or sober as much as he can anyway. And I think he does anyway. I'm not 100% sure on that, not having read the whole series. But in this one, his wife left him after his, this happened. I think probably because he became, hard to live with. But he's a good guy and he's a very good investigator. And here he's hired by the father of a young woman who was brutally murdered, severely slashed to death, stabbed to death in her Greenwich Village apartment. And turns out the man just wants to know kind of what happened. His daughter was his stepdaughter, as it turns out, or adopted daughter, but she left school and kind of disappeared from his and her mother and his lives, and he wants to know what brought about this sad situation. It seems an open and shut case because the young man who was living with her, was caught kind of red-handed. I guess he's running around with his willy out and covered in her blood and saying, I did it, or whatever. But, was he really the killer? And what else was involved? And most of the book is just Scudder poking into the lives of these people and finding out the truth. And it's very well written. Very well written. That it's not, the plot is, if you've read private detective fiction or mystery fiction, you kind of figure out kind of where the plot is going. It's a good plot, but it's not, Agatha Christie fiendishly clever sort of plot. But what it is just as usual with these books, a means or a framework for for us to get to know the investigator and his methods and the people he meets, the kind of damaged people, generally speaking. And this is really good. It captures the city well, although it's not overly focused on, scene setting in New York City and elsewhere. But mainly what comes into clear focus is the character of Matthew Scudder. And he's a really, obviously shrewd investigator, but you can tell that he's kind of living a half-life, really. He's not allowing himself to fully, be alive in the usual sense after the tragedy that he caused and that has befallen him. So it's really well done, very well written, and I really enjoyed it a lot. Anyway, it was a good way to fill that time as I was waiting for my doctor's appointment, etc. So thanks again for that, Nick. I will definitely get more of these Matthew Scudder novels and read them. I like that a lot. Okay, next I read, and this one I covered in a video already. Again, getting to some Occult Detective October reading. I read a couple of Manly Wade Wellman stories. One was a novel, The School of Darkness, and I also read a short story from Weird Tales, Shonokin Town. Both of these feature Wellman's, I guess, occult investigator or occult fighter character, John Funston. They were a lot of fun. I've read School of Darkness multiple times. This is probably my 5th or 6th reading. It's just a real fun. It's kind of almost a comfort read. It's for me, I just really enjoy it. It's nothing spectacular or anything plot-wise, but it's cool, and Wellman mixes in a few characters from prior stories, including John Funston's archenemy, Rowley Thorne, who doesn't appear in the Shonokin Town story. Shonokin Town is another recurring set of villains, I guess you could say, kind of alternate type of humanoid people that have inhabited Earth prior to humanity and want to take it back if possible. And they appeared in a Silver John novel, After Dark, and then several of these. They made their first appearance in these John Funston stories for Weird Tales. I think they're at least in 3 or 4 of them. And Shonokin Town was a really fun read. So I recommend if you want to know more about either of these two, the novel and the story, please check out that previous video. The third book I read was a collection of, from the British Library, The Tales of the Weird, and I did a video on this one as well, so I will just talk briefly now. The British Library Tales of the Weird edition of The Ghost Slayers, Thrilling Tales of Occult Detection, edited by Mike Ashley, a real expert in this kind of field, supernatural fiction. And it was great. I loved almost every one of these stories. There was, some terrific writers in here, and again, I went through every story in the book in my video. So feel free to watch that if you want some more detail. But, there's a John Silence story from Algernon Blackwood, more of a novelette. That was really good. There was a Carnacki story by William Hope Hodgson, not amongst his best, but still a good read. And several others of note of characters that I was either unfamiliar with or had heard of but not read before. So, excellent volume. Highly recommend you check that out. Okay, next I read, because it was around my birthday and my wife got me, The Revenge of the Babysat, one of the collections of Bill Watterson's, Bill Watterson's great comic strip that he wrote for many years. Besides being very funny, very incisive, Calvin is a little hellion, but sarcastic little guy, but he also has, he's a vehicle for some philosophizing and commentary from the artist and writer, Watterson. And what I also like is he gets, sometimes you have little runs in the comic. You could tell that it ran for a week where there was where there was a continuing story. And one of them that's, what I like about this is there's one part here where if I can find it, where the family's house they go away for a while and they come back and the house has been broken into. They go on a camping trip, which is always a disaster. Of course, Calvin and his tiger Hobbs, who seems to be only a toy stuffed tiger, but is he real? He's real to Calvin and is a boon companion, even though they often bicker and fight as well. But one of the running gags in this series is that the dad, the poor put-upon dad, who sometimes Calvin comes up and says, "Dad, you're not doing well in the father polls," works hard and has to put up with Calvin's mischief at home. But whenever they go camping, which he loves to do, the dad just is full of life. He comes alive when they go camping, and he wants to get up early and go fishing and fry the fish for breakfast and smell the clean air and let's go for a swim in the lake. And Calvin and his mom are just complaining the whole time. So that's funny. But they had this running bit here where it goes for, looks like it went for a couple of weeks, where after coming back from a trip to see some relatives or something, they find their house has been broken into, and Hobbs is missing. Now, Hobbs wasn't stolen, of course, and that's the main worry for Calvin. But the nice thing is, even though Calvin and Hobbs secondarily are the main focus of these strips, the parents get some character growth here, or character work, where, you know, they feel uncomfortable in their own home, violated, someone's been in their home, and do they feel safe anymore, and what, you know, they can't sleep afterwards for a little while. So again, that's a kind of poignant and true to life touch that Watterson puts in these comic strips that he didn't need to. He could have just kept them, you know, the usual great imagination that Calvin displays, where he becomes Spaceman Spiff in his mind, or he's being a Tyrannosaur or whatever, and skulking around. But, you know, it adds a little extra depth to these. I want to show you also, it's obvious that despite the cartoony art which is very effective, that Watterson does, he's capable of doing, you know, obviously some real nice, proper art. Pterosaurs in this case, you know, Calvin pretending to be a rampaging dinosaur, or a bird, you know, making some singing noise and disturbing his mom. And, you know, or like this, where he's playing with the constantly his He-Man Girls Haters Club, that, you know, there's neighbor Susie that just wants to play house with him, and they do this kind of soap opera-y sort of strip that ends in, you know, disaster, as Calvin doesn't want to play house at all, of course. Anyway, obviously Watterson is highly talented and can do any kind of art that he wanted to do, but he, you know, obviously focused mostly on his, you know, comic strip character, which was highly, highly successful, of course, and very, very entertaining. What I really respect and admire about Watterson is, you know, a lot of comic artists, or newspaper comic strip artists, to be more precise, can really achieve massive financial success by getting all sorts of merchandising for their products. Thus, someone like Charles M. Schulz, whose estate is worth, you know, millions of dollars because of all the Snoopy and Woodstock goods, etc. But Bill Watterson refused to do that. He never sold out that way. Again, I'm not blaming any writer like Schulz or whoever who would do that, or Gary Larson at the Far Side, my second favorite comic strip after Calvin and Hobbes. You know, they have calendars and all sorts of things. So I don't know if he has limited merchandising, but I guess that just the nature of that comic strip would limit itself, I suppose. But there are no Calvin and Hobbes dolls, or official anyway, t-shirts, or no movie or cartoon series for TV made from this property, which surely would have been done multiple times if he had allowed it. But no, he ended his strip at a high point. You know, he wanted to go out on a high. There's just enough to publish 12 of these collections. You know, they got, you know, probably several hundred strips in each book. But so there's a lot, obviously, of the original material out there, and thank goodness for that. But no other stuff made from Calvin and Hobbes property, just the books. And there are different editions of books, and there's a Calvin and Hobbes treasury. And so I think anything that's a book involved with being put in book form or format is okay, of course. But other than that, nothing. So good on him. Good on him for going out on a high and not, you know, cleaning up like he could. I'm sure he made enough money off it, but it's rare, I think, to find an author these days that would, or, you know, in the last several decades, that wouldn't willingly do that. just take any kind of offer they could get for merchandising. So, I'm not saying I wouldn't do the opposite if I was him in his shoes. I can certainly see why you would. But you got to respect that. You got to respect a man with principles or a woman with principles. All right. Some of you might go, hey, you're counting a collection of comic strips as your book. So, whatever. I'm going to count it. It's if it's on Goodreads and it's a book, I'm going to count it. So, a lot of fun. Okay, the next book I read was The Theft of the Iron Dogs by E.C.R. Lorac. Now, E.C.R. Lorac her real name was Edith Carolyn Rivette. She sometimes wrote under the pseudonym Carol Carnac. And she was a pretty prolific British Golden Age or maybe Silver Age detective novelist. Her main character was Chief Inspector John MacDonald, is the Chief Inspector for Scotland Yard, and I've read a few of her MacDonald books, and this one is kind of I guess you would say a subset, a trilogy set in the Lancashire Fells area, which is kind of like a very lush countryside farming center or region of the UK. Now, I lived in Preston, Lancashire for a year when I was 21 years old, going to school overseas there, one of the high points of my life, and it was a beautiful area. E.C.R. Lorac was kind of a forgotten writer. She was popular in her day, I guess, and of course they kept publishing many of her books. I think there's at least 30 plus, maybe even 40 of these Chief Inspector MacDonald books. The British Library also have done, and this is how I first found out about the British Library, long before the British Library Tales of the Weird series. The British Library Crime Classics line has been very successful for the British Library, and they've sold a lot of these books that have been put out with cool new kind of retro Art Deco-y sort of landscape covers, and they're published in the US, published in Britain, of course, and on Kindle. I have many of them on Kindle. I have a few in physical book form. I read this one in a Kindle form because they're usually quite inexpensive. And this one I think did quite well. And, she's, Miss Lorac's been brought back into the mystery fans' consciousness with these republications from the British Library Crime Classics line. Now this one, the Iron Dogs of the title are not actual dogs. They're, just called dogs. They're two kind of heavy metal stands, I guess you could say, for they go in the fireplace of this fishing cottage that belongs to this farmer couple named the Hoggets. A previous book, I believe it's Crookoloon, had Chief Inspector MacDonald go up to this Lancashire Fells area to solve a case. And he loved the area very much, so he's quite eager to go back when he receives a letter from Giles Hoggett, who is a farmer who used to be a bookseller and also had played rugby, it turns out, in a match, again, a very well-remembered match against MacDonald in their youth. So they become immediate fast friends. But basically, Giles Hoggett, very, very wonderful character. This book is full of wonderful characters, and that's probably its main selling point. The mystery is good, and the investigation is very well depicted. But where Lorac really excels in this novel anyway, as well as others from my memory, is the setting, the capturing of this beautiful countryside, small town village life, and the surrounding farming community, and the oddball and interesting and lovable characters that populate this area. Chief amongst those, this Giles Hoggett farmer, who is kind of working to have a dairy farm and other animals, and his very common sense wife. So anyway, Giles Hoggett, this farmer, is going down for whatever reason. It's heavy rain and the river nearby is getting full, and he wants to go check it out and maybe get a little fishing in, even though his wife wants him to help do some more honeydews around the house. They, being farming family, they work quite hard all the way around the year, but he's hell-bent on going fishing, and he goes down there, and then he decides, while I'm there, I'm going to check on our little cottage, which some family members stayed at during the summer holidays. But he sees something amiss, and this is what starts off the whole case, because he notices someone's been messing with his wood pile outside. And then he goes inside the house, the cottage, because he's left the key somewhere under a rock or something in the back of the garden. And he goes in and finds, some odd items have gone missing, including a big, ugly Macintosh of his, and some fishing line, some salmon wire, I guess, heavier fishing line, and these two heavy iron dogs of the title. And it's strange. And he goes and talks to like the local squire, kind of, who had dealings with this Chief Inspector MacDonald in the previous book, and said, this sounds suspicious, like perhaps someone was trying to weight a body down in a deep pool near the river. That's the worry, anyway. And so Giles decides to send a letter to this Chief Inspector on the squire's advice. He says, this guy's a real, salt of the earth type, and if anyone would be, open-minded to your concern to this situation, it might be him. And MacDonald's in the middle of kind of a search for this missing grifter guy who's been doing some kind of coupon theft, and is behind some kind of petty theft in London, and there's a search for him, and he's gone missing, maybe to one of his so-called bolt holes or whatever around the country. So but he's kind of happy to have a little sidetrack for a moment over his lunch, and he reads this letter from Giles, and he becomes immediately interested. And as it turns out, the two cases converge in an interesting way. And before long, MacDonald's up north, ensconced in that cottage, and even hanging out a lot with Giles Hoggett, and getting along like a house on fire with him, and using his Giles' knowledge of the local area to determine who might be the culprit, because eventually they do find a body in the pool down by the river, one of these curving pools. They find a body suspended where it wouldn't have normally been found, tied to some roots of a tree under this overhang of a bank. And the body is of this missing grifter, and the case is now who killed him. And it should be someone in the local area. But is it one of the longtime farmers or one of the more new settlers to the area? Anyway, very fun mystery novel. Good criminal investigation stuff mixed in there with a lot of great character work, and some amusing asides, and just a lot of fun. Really lovely book. This was published in 1946. So another fun part of the setting or the tone of the book is that it's set right after World War II, and there's still rationing going on. And of course, up in the fell country there in Lancashire, amongst the farmers, they have access to all this kind of rich, lovely food that the people in London do not, right? They're limited to, at the time, because there was the rationing going on still as Britain tried to recover after the Blitz and everything. So people were limited to like an egg a week or an egg a month or something ridiculous like that. And here they have access, MacDonald has all these sausages and cheese and real butter and eggs. And so there's some real fun and tasty sounding food descriptions, and MacDonald is being fed very well while he's there investigating. Apparently there's one more novel that's also set in this Lunesville or something, this little farming community town where this book takes place. Wonderful setting, wonderful fun story. There's some grimmer moments to it, but mostly it's a pretty light-hearted read. A good golden age detective novel if you like that sort of thing. So in September, Bob Freeman, the Occult Detective, really cool channel and a really cool guy, talked at length about the Kirwan and Conrad stories, occult detective stories written by the great Robert E. Howard. So it turns out the only one of these Kirwan and Conrad stories I seem to have. There might be a kind of side one, but one of the official ones anyway I have is the titular story in this Wordsworth, I believe it's a Wordsworth. Yeah, Wordsworth editions, Tales of Mystery and the Supernatural. They have several of these, and this is The Haunter of the Ring and Other Tales by Robert E. Howard. And I read the titular story, The Haunter of the Ring. Now, this doesn't have Conrad in it, but it does feature Kirwan predominantly. And another Conrad stand-in, I guess. He knows Kirwan, who is more aware of the occult arts and lore. And together they meet this, when this narrator shows up to Kirwan's place, he sees this very distraught man who is convinced his dear wife is trying to kill him and has tried several times. And the last time tried to stab him, and it's almost like she's been possessed. A man who was a rival for her affections before she married this other person has maybe some occult powers, and he's controlling her through this ring that she is wearing. And what is Kirwan going to do about it? It's quite a fun story. And Kirwan shows that he's a force to be reckoned with when it comes to the occult arts and fighting dark forces. A very fun story. This was originally published in, I believe, the June 1934 issue of Weird Tales magazine. And it's collected in this book along with several others. That's the only one that I got to of the Kirwan and Conrad stories during this past October. Sorry, Bob. I'll try to get some more. I believe I have some more in my Robert E. Howard Cthulhu Mythos paperback collection. If not, I'll get a hold of something else that has more of these for next Occult Detective October next year. To finish off the month, it wasn't Occult Detective exactly because I guess he is kind of a detective, but I read a Doc Savage novel, number 14 in the series. I know it says number 7 on Bantam. Don't ever go by the numbering on the Bantam paperbacks, as lovely as they are with their fantastic James Bama covers, mostly like this one here. Great James Bama picture, which is unusual for him. Bama usually didn't follow exactly what the pulp novel covers depicted. Very rarely did he ever do so, but this one is very similar. Depicted the same thing, this giant hand grabbing Doc. Now, whether the giants depicted in this story, and yes, there are real giants, this is a real monster. There are real monsters of sorts, human-sized monsters anyway, or human monsters in gargantuan size in this book. So some Doc Savage books go the Scooby-Doo route where there seems like there's a monster, but there's really not. And some actually have monsters or weird races from kind of lost worlds or etc. But this is one of the early ones. This is book number 14, published in publishing order of the original pulp run, and came out in, I believe, was it April 1934 as well. So pretty close to just a couple months ahead of that Kirwan story by Robert E. Howard that I talked about. But now, again, when you're reading pulp fiction, you have to take into account the time it was written in. I don't usually get overly concerned about the content that's, not really pleasant for our sensibilities these days, usually. But this one starts off a little rougher than usual. Doc Savage novels usually, this one was written by Lester Dent, like the majority of them were, not all. Some were ghost-written because it's pretty hard to come up with a novel a month for one writer, so they farmed some out. But Lester Dent wrote this one like he wrote most of the early ones. And, this starts off kind of a little with some rather appalling racist terminology here with some African pinheads, as they're called, there's some tribal people that are kind of circus freaks. And they go missing at the circus. This is set up in the Great Lakes region, I believe in Wisconsin. And at some place called Trapper Lake. And there's what they refer to constantly in the first couple of chapters, a half-breed, or breed as they call him, who's a particularly nasty piece of work and is not nice to these these kind of pathetically, starving African tribesmen who they're starving. They come to his cabin in the woods, and he kicks at them and beats them, and they run away. Well, that was a big mistake, because before too long, several months later anyway, these African tribes people who are no longer small are back with the vengeance and demolish this kind of petty criminal guy's, what was his name? He had a weird name. What was his name? Bruno Hen. Bruno Hen, the half-breed of, as he's referred to sadly quite often here, gets crushed to death and his house destroyed. And this basically comes to the attention of Doc Savage, and we're off and running. And from after this first section where it was a little bit questionable, it gets back to normal Doc Savage business with lots and lots of action. That's where the Doc Savage books really excel, especially when written by Lester Dent, who was a veteran pulp writer and wrote lots of crime stories and PI stories and things. And he was a pretty deft writer of action. And there's some pretty cool and sometimes eerie scenes in this book of Doc and his 5 aides camping in the North Woods, hearing this huge crashing as giant bodies come charging in towards their encampment and treat their large amphibian plane like a tin toy and beat the crap out of it. And what's behind these gigantic humanoids, and what's the plot, etc. What is the bad guy's purpose? Which is as usual with bad guys in these sort of things. It's not so much world domination. In this case, it's money, money, money. Criminal enterprises. Anyway, a lot of fun. Again, usually Doc Savage books are by the standards of the time, and as the series goes on, you're going to see less and less of that kind of blatant racist stuff. But that was a little bit of a ding to this book at the beginning. But it was still an atmospheric opening with the way that the Bruno Hen guy was dispatched. That's kind of a trademark of a lot of the Doc Savage novels, is someone meets a grisly end on their way to talk to Doc Savage. That happens here later. A neighbor of Bruno Hen, kind of innocent backwoodsman guy who who's told to go to Doc Savage and let him know about what's going on. He doesn't last very long, but it's enough to get Doc involved. And Doc is, as usual, on top of everything quite often. But even he, as strong and as massive as he is no match for the physical strength of these giants. Although he does go head to head with one of them later, but uses his brains and some sneaky techniques to win out. And he doesn't stick around to fight very long, because he would get crushed by these guys. We never quite get a reading of the size of them exactly, other than they're probably at least double a human's height. But I doubt they're as big as depicted in this cover. But it sure makes a cool cover anyway. A lot of fun, and a science fictional rationale, kind of using some science as it was considered at the time, as far as growth, kind of chemical hormones or chemical compounds that were meant to increase food production, make giant-sized cows and giant-sized livestock being applied for criminal purposes to humans. There's one really a couple of really incredible scenes of them attacking a local town, and then the finale is quite a rousing kind of turning, monsters turning on their so-called master sort of situation. Good fun, as usual, Doc Savage books, especially these earlier super sagas. I usually prefer ones where Doc is overseas, Doc and Company, or overseas in more exotic locales. But and this one's just set in the kind of the woods around the Great Lakes region. But get some good atmosphere, lots of good action, and a pretty fun read to cap off the month. So I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to watch my videos, like, subscribe, leave comments. It's very much appreciated. I really am glad and shocked, right, frankly, at the reception I've got and the interaction I've got. It really is the community aspect of YouTube and BookTube in particular is something special. So thanks again. Hope you enjoy whatever you get up to reading-wise or otherwise in November. And until the next video, take care, and I'll see you again.